Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our next session. But before that, quickly like to remind you again of the CyberNX contest. And if you have still not participated, please go through the brochure of CyberNX. Go to the last page, scan the barcode, and enter into the digital contest. And 5 lucky winners stand a chance to win exciting goodies from CyberNX to be decided and given before the award ceremony. Contest ends at 2 p.m. Also would like to bring to your attention about the LinkedIn contest. If you have still not participated, please scan the code on the media label or on the screen itself, and you will directly be directed to the Synnex LinkedIn page. Like, follow, make your postings, tag @ of Synnex Group, and mention the hashtag @ India CISO Summit in all of your postings. The winner, and only one, with the most innovative posting and the maximum postings, will win an exciting brand new smartphone from Synnex to be declared before the award ceremony. Contest for this contest also ends at 2 p.m. today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the next presentation session of the day, and it is on another exciting subject and topic. Every log has a story to tell. Is your SoC listening? And to present this, I would like to call on stage with a big round of applause, Mr. Bhowmik, Shah, co-founder and CTO from CyberNX. Can we have Bhowmik with a big round of applause? Bhowmik, welcome to the stage, and excited to have you here. Looking forward to a fantastic presentation.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to hide behind the podium. The last time I tried to walk on a stage and talk, I almost fell off. I don't want that happening again. This is a marketing tactic. All right, great. There we get started. All right, so good morning again. I hope everybody's tanked up on tea, coffee, biscuits, whatever. I'm going to talk about a security operations center. I'm going to talk about how you make your security monitoring more effective. Some of the stories that we've heard in the trenches, what we've seen in practice. I'll try and address some of the concerns. Maybe, hopefully, I'll leave you with some insights on how you can make your SoC more effective. So let's get started. Right? You see that nice, cool hacker face? So a series of unfortunate events. Right? There's a pun on events over here. I'm looking at events not just in terms of logs or incidents, but also things that happen within your environment. Right? So all organizations collect and monitor their logs. Right? There's a certain hygiene that they maintain when it comes to showcasing to their internal stakeholders that, look, we have visibility into our environment. We will be able to capture any suspicious activity happening, and we'll be able to prevent it, or at least contain it, right? They're constantly on the lookout for signs of compromise, signs of suspicious behavior within their environment. And this is, again, to show all of their stakeholders what is happening within their environment, right? Internally, they are always wondering about the effectiveness of these two activities, right? Am I monitoring the right things? Am I collecting the right logs? Do I know what indicators of compromise am I looking for? Do I know what are my weak areas? Do I know where are my gaps, right? Why? Why does that happen, right? Keeping KPIs aside, keeping KRAs aside, keep aside your mean time to detect, keep aside your mean time to respond. Any security professional, true to their heart, will know there's a gut feeling that you get. You know, when you're looking at your environment, you know how secure it is or how bad is it, right? It sometimes becomes very difficult to translate this into numbers or metrics, which you can put into a presentation and showcase to the board, right? So that sort of partially answers the why. Why does everybody keep worrying about, am I doing the right thing? Where does that anxiety come from, okay? So I'm going to talk about an incident. Cloud account compromise. That's the flavor of the season. We had Mandiant over here. I'm assuming Uber's talking to them probably. But let's look at a few scenarios. Right? So what I have on screen over here is a log from an AWS CloudTrail activity, right? This is a failed login attempt. I've got red arrows which actually tell you this is a console login. It failed. And if you see this, the yes bit, it says that MFA was actually used, right? Fairly typical. Great, thank you. Cool. So MFA used, yes, right? So fairly typical activity. Somebody tried to log into their account, fat fingered the password, their OTP expired, something happened. So this shows up in your log. Your SIM receives it, categorizes it, gives it a low or medium severity. Your analyst takes a look at it. There's probably a valid username over here. The principal ID seems familiar. The account ID is yours. So you're all okay. Maybe somebody genuinely made a mistake, right? They take this. They do send out this alert, right? Let's look at another scenario. We had a bit of a discussion on this yesterday. I think Anand had some very good insights. This is an ML-based behavior rule, which is primarily looking at where. So this is an unusual time for a user to log in, right? So it's based on the learning that it has had from previous login patterns. It uses a username, the source IP, and the timestamp, which I unfortunately don't have over here, to showcase that, okay, these three parameters don't match with what I've seen before, right? So I'm going to flag this because this is an unusual thing happening for this user and this activity, right? Again, this may be an indicator of compromise. This may be normal activity. I don't know how your SoC deals with it or how your analyst flags it, but you will definitely get an alert. Another scenario, another machine learning based behavior rule. This is specific to an unusual location. So we have a rare source IP. The source IP is geolocated to a specific location. It's rare. Again, the feeder fields into the ML model are username and source IP, right? Again, primarily what we've seen over here, three events. One is a failed login attempt, fairly normal, console login. MFA was used, could have been a genuine attempt which failed. An ML rule which says a user logged in at an unusual time. Maybe something went wrong. They tried to log in, they failed. They were sleepy, they did not put in the password properly, and an attempt to log in from an unusual location, right? All of these three will most probably be detected by your SIEM, right? So what is really happening over here? What are we trying to say? What am I trying to say, right? Like I said, three different alerts. You'll probably see them in your SIEM. They will be probably sent out by a monitoring team with different kinds of severity. Your responders may have different means or ways to respond to this. They may not treat them as significant, right? Or they may just say, okay, fine, let me just verify, is this a valid user? Do they have the privilege to log in? If yes, maybe they just fail to log in. So I'm going to ignore this for now, right? It may genuinely be typical user behavior. We have work from home. You may have teams spread out. You may have somebody who's working remotely. Somebody said, I'm going to move to Mexico for a month and I'm going to work from there. Different time zones, different locations. He's a privileged user. He or she has access to your AWS account. They log in. They're trying to do normal BAU activities, right? So it may genuinely be typically standard user behavior. But is it really? How can you tell, right? So let's take a step back. Let's look at how breaches would happen, okay? I'm going to take credential compromise again as the example, and we're going to take three most common ways that accounts get compromised. Cloud account, okay? The first one is social engineering. You convince somebody to part with their credentials. It could be some website or a phone call or some other mechanism, and you end up with their credentials. Phishing, I'm cheating a little here. Phishing still falls under social engineering, but it's so big and so successful that it deserves its own segment. Phishing is most likely the most common way that somebody will end up losing their credentials. And credential leak, a genuine credential leak where the employee's account got compromised, it showed up on a data breach on RAID forums or someplace, and they had a weak password and it showed up in plain text somewhere, right? There are other ways and means, but these are the most prominent and the most common ones, right? Now, is your detection layer capable of identifying these, chaining these together? The chaining bit is very important. The three scenarios that we saw previously individually do not have a lot of significance in any environment, right? There's normal activity that happens which is covered by noise like this, right? But within a short span of time, You have a failed login. You have a user trying to log in from an unusual location. You have a user trying to log in at an unusual time, right? The chaining is very important. Is your lowest layer, is your L1 layer capable enough of identifying that there's something fishy over here, right? Are they empowered? By empowered, I mean, do they have the capability to understand the significance of these events? Are they sensitized? Are they aware of what is the risk that happens over here? Or are they just looking at brute force login or failed login in silos as independent line items, right? Are they business aware and risk aware? I think that's a very important point that most organizations tend to miss, right? There's so much separation, there's so many degrees of separation between your L1 layer or your L2 layer and the actual risks that get discussed in the boardroom that sometimes there's a huge disconnect. And I see a huge gap primarily over there, right? That is where most security operations center are not effective, right? So I think one of the questions that everybody should be asking are those points in blue. Have you empowered, sensitized, and made your detection layer capable enough, aware enough of what are the risks that are faced by the business, and who to send them off to and how to identify them, right? Now, again, let's go back to a breach in a little more detail, okay? Since you're talking about a SoC, how do you actually detect the three activities? So let's talk about social engineering first. Can you log social engineering, right? Is your state-of-the-art, next-gen SIEM tool capable of logging a social engineering activity and identifying that behavior? Logging that activity? No. Identifying the behavior? Most probably yes. Any tool that you pick, whether from the Gartner quadrant or out of the Gartner quadrant, they'll have some form of capability to be able to detect suspicious behavior, right? So social engineering can partially be detected within an SIEM. Phishing. Can you log phishing attempts? Can you raise an alert? Can you flag things out? Yes. You could have your email service provider. It could be Google, it could be Office 365. They'll have their own logs. You may have an email gateway. You may have some mechanism to identify if this email is coming in from a domain which has DKIM set or SPF set, or you may have a DMARC analysis tool. There are various ways and means of identifying the veracity of an email, right? So you can take the logs, you can feed them into your SIEM, you can build use cases and rules around them. So very much detectable. Credential leaks. Yes, this is detectable. What you cannot do is your SIEM will not be able to detect this, right? You need to look outside because your credentials, your employee credentials are typically going to show up on a dark web forum. It's going to show up on a marketplace. Are you consuming a service which provides you insight into the dark web? Do you have visibility into when there is chatter about your organization on underground marketplaces, right? So credential leaks can be identified. The simplest thing that you could do is maybe sign up to Have I Been Pawned and get a feed from them for your specific organization. There are a whole bunch of different services. You need to see if they can ship logs out or send out alerts to your SIEM, and then you can feed them in so that the analysts can start looking at that, right? So credential leaks can definitely be logged and monitored. Privilege escalation, fairly standard. There's no rocket science over here. Day in, day out, it's been happening. It's been logged, detected. A simple sudo on a Linux machine or run as administrator on Windows can very easily be tracked and logged in the most basic of SIEMs, right? And persistence. Again, persistence, lateral movement, local account creation, enumeration of SMB shares or AD, curb roasting, credential dumping, all of that can be logged. There's very advanced tools available in most SIEM products out there, right? So these are some of the pieces of the puzzle. So you can log some of those activities, you can detect some of those activities, but what happens if you don't, right? The potential impact, the potential fallout, since we're talking about a cloud account compromise, you're going to have a very huge cloud bill to handle. If you are not aware of it in time, loss of data, loss of reputation, loss of trust from your customers who will probably hesitate to do business with you or suspend existing contracts, right? So huge pressure, as Amit just spoke before this, when an incident happens, there's a lot of management pressure if your company has any value on the market, right? So what do we do to avoid this? How do we make the SOC more effective, right? There are pieces of the puzzle that we spoke about. Let's try and fill this out, right? what are the primary pieces of the puzzle? And maybe this is a question that all of you all can ask yourselves when you go back to your organization, that how many of these pieces we have in place? The first is your surface area, right? Your surface area is going to be very vast. What I'm talking about as surface area is your cloud, if you have a cloud presence, if you have an on-prem presence, if you have a hybrid presence, if you have multi-cloud presence, all of that is your surface area. How do you monitor it? What is your periphery? Your VPNs, your firewalls, API gateways, web application firewalls, jump boxes, or services that you expose onto the internet. That is also a very major part of your surface area, right? Your servers, again, that's a part of your internal surface area. So we're looking at internal and external surface area. So for internal threats, your servers, your applications, your technology stack. A lot of the times what I see organizations miss out on doing is we use MySQL, but we're not consuming MySQL logs. Or we have slow query logs which are feeding into the SIM. They don't really help from a threat hunting perspective, right? So you need to be aware of your application stack. You need to be aware of what sort of security audit data does your application stack throw out, which can help contribute to your SIM rules, right? The next very important bit is your communication mechanisms, right? What sort of instant messaging platforms do you use? Can you monitor WhatsApp, right? I'd like to put out an open question. Is there any CISO out there right now who's comfortable with his or her team members communicating over WhatsApp? I'm not. You know, that's a medium that's totally not in my control. I have no visibility of what's happening over there. Forget WhatsApp. There's Slack, there's Teams, there's Hangouts, there's Discord. Do you have the ability to monitor all of this, right? So there's a very big gap over there. Even if we talk about the recent Uber breach, I think there was a component where some sort of Slack communication was involved. There is no way that you're going to be able to monitor that, even if you have a subscription to Slack, right? Email, yes, you can monitor. You should monitor. In fact, there should be a significant amount of focus on your email monitoring, right? Document shares. There's a lot of organizations use SaaS services are document shares, but you may have SharePoint, you may have some other means or mechanisms. Google Docs, you know, collaboration platform. Do you have the visibility into what is happening? Who is sharing what outside, right? So that's your communication layer. Endpoints. This is where most organizations have very high maturity. You'll probably have a state-of-the-art EDR, XDR, you've got very fancy rules, you've got AI, ML, that agent sitting on your end-user machine is going to detect what the user is doing, is going to build a profile about the behavior pattern of the user. So significant maturity exists over here, and typically either you have a separate team monitoring this, or this feeds into your SIEM, and your SOC analysts take a look at it. Behavior, user behavior. Again, there's a reasonable amount of maturity here as well. If you've got some form of an EDR or XDR, that will take care of this. Even for things like authentication, AD authentication, SSO authentication, your SIEM will have the ability to identify and flag out anomalous activities over here, right? The last and another very important bit is external visibility. Like I spoke, dark web, data leaks, data breaches, employee compromise, right? Social media. How do you monitor that? You probably need some sort of a third-party service which will give you insight and visibility into your external chatter, right? Again, this does not come cheap. So you sort of have to weigh out what your pros and cons are, what your risk appetite is, what the organization's risk appetite is, right? But these are, by and large, the pieces of the puzzle that you need to fill in. What you probably want to ask is, how many of these? So of course, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, right? I'm just trying to showcase you know, if you can look at it in terms of a concentric circle, I'm trying to showcase the layers that you will probably have to feed into your SIM to be able to figure out what is happening in your environment. It's not a very simplified thing that you just take logs from your servers or your network devices and you're done. Generally, it doesn't happen that way, right? So, since I have limited time, I'm going to rush. I don't have too many slides, so that's fine. I'm pretty much done. I'm assuming a lot of you have seen this, right? If not, a brief introduction. The bits that I've covered out, this is effectively a compromise flow for the Uber breach that happened, right? I've blocked out Uber because I don't want to focus on Uber as an organization, but I want to focus on what we see over here. Very rarely do you see an attack put out which has the flow mapped out so nicely. Right? We talk about MITRE attack framework, we talk about TTPs. Look at each of the block that we have over here. So we have credentials acquired in the dark forums. Would your SoC have been able to identify that and notify you? Yes, no, I don't know. There was MFA spear phishing that happened. There's a lot of funny videos out on YouTube on how that happened, but it typically triggered MFA fatigue, and they managed to bypass MFA, right? Would your SoC have been able to identify that? I don't know, right? Then you move on to VPN, right? This is where probably your SIEM starts to play a role, right? VPN access from a remote location, unusual hour, failed login, something like that, right? Lateral movement, scanning of the internal Uber infrastructure, identifying or accessing sensitive files, right? So your PowerShell scripts identified in a sensitive network share. Again, this goes to your document share. Are you monitoring all file access in the document share, right? PowerShell script contain credentials. There's really nothing you can do about it. I would love to see an SIEM product which will tell me that you've got something in this file, not counting Git secrets, right? Then the PAM was compromised using the credentials, not compromised. I mean, an attacker just used the credentials to log in, and you're very happy that he was able to. And that gave them access to a lot of applications and infrastructure and led to data exfiltration, right? This is a very common scenario, much more common than you would think. And if an organization the size of Uber, with the skills, with the team strength, with the team that they have, can be subjected to this, you probably want to introspect and think, where do you lie in the maturity level, right? Your employee is, forget malicious intentions, right? Even unknowingly, your employee will probably fall victim to one of these, right? There will be days, bad days, high pressure days, something will go wrong, right? So what do you need to do? How do you make sense out of all of this? Let's go to something that most of us will be comfortable and familiar with. How do you need to log? What does your logging and monitoring policy say? Are you capturing only debug logs, or are you capturing actual security audit trails that will help you in figuring out what is going on in your environment, not just from your servers, but from your business applications as well, right? Do you know what are your information assets? What are your critical assets? Have you tagged them based on criticality, right? What is your attack surface area? Are you aware your attack surface area also includes your vendors, right? What sort of interfacing and interactivity do your vendors have with your environment, right? What do you need to log? Business applications, communications, infrastructure, end user, SaaS. Most of us know what we're doing over here, right? After doing this, what do you need to look for? To achieve as close to 360-degree visibility, you need threat modeling. Threat modeling is basically identifying what is my threat, okay? Start off from your risk register. You have a list of risks. You have a list of missing controls over there, which means you have gaps in protection, right? So put more eyes over there, put more use cases, put more visibility over there, right? And use detection engineering to build use cases to fill in the gaps that you have in terms of missing controls, right? I'm actually going to rush through this slide. We're almost at the end and I'm out of time. But if we talk about the Nist framework, which all of us are familiar with, right? Identify, have a current asset inventory. Have a current asset inventory with criticality tagged. Now, keep in mind, your asset inventory is not just your servers, but also your critical team members, right? Your head of DevOps, the person who has access to the password vault. You know, all of those people are critical information assets. Correct log ingestion. Your logging and monitoring policy should very explicitly say that we need security and audit logs from every single critical application that I have in my infrastructure, right? Use detection engineering to make sense out of where your gaps are and what you need to monitor. Don't just rely on out-of-the-box tools. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to security monitoring. Every organization has some or the other deviation or drift from how they handle and manage security, right? You will have a third layer of protection, a preventive layer, your DLP, your MDM, what else? EDR. Are those tools feeding logs into your SIEM to give you, again, closer to 360-degree visibility, right? The closer you get, I personally don't believe that you can achieve full 360-degree visibility. So the closer you can get to it, the better your ability to respond will be, right? Response comes later. If you are in for automation, fine, you can do that. Your security operations center, has that maturity, you have that confidence in the stability of your infrastructure, then look at automation, SOAR. I'm trying to avoid saying SOAR, but that is what everybody's leaning towards. Ideally, you want to not get to the last stage, right? But we spoke about cyber resilience yesterday, right? So cyber resilience, recovery is a very big part of that. You have to be ready for incident response. You have to be ready for containment, and you have to move to recovery, right? If the push comes to shove, you should be ready with all of that, right? So to wrap up, right? If a lot of this has been confusing for all of you, right? Let me simplify it. There's no magic pill. Security is not as complex that you think it should be. Leave all the hype aside, leave all the buzzwords aside, leave everything aside. At its core, security is about discipline, right? You can have the best current, next gen state of the art tools, but if you cannot detect what is going wrong in your environment, or you don't know how to detect what is going wrong in your environment, then those tools are useless. All that money that you've invested is not going to be effective, right? The sooner you can detect something, the quicker you can move to containment and response, right? And that is very important today, because if you're basically sitting and relying that my preventive tool is going to protect me from what I have to do, then you're in for trouble, right? Empower your detection layer. This is very important. We generally feel that my L1 analyst does not need to know what my risk is. No, that's a very big mistake. Whether you have a vendor managing this for you or you have an in-house team, it is very important for them to have an understanding of what are the risks that are being discussed in the boardroom. Maybe not in that much detail, but they need to have an overall high level, maybe a 30,000 feet overview, or they need somebody within their team who can translate what happened in the boardroom into actual risk that they see within the logs, right? If you don't listen to your detection layer, that can be very costly for you. Right? So the takeaway primarily is security is about discipline. Your ability to respond and identify is going to be about discipline. The more disciplined and thorough you are, the better your security is going to be within an organization. There is no magic pill, at least not that I know of. Right? And that's it. That's me, Bhowmik. I'm the CTO and co-founder at CyberNX. We can take questions if there's any.
Yeah, I have one.
Sure.
Can you just take only one slide back?
Yeah. So?
Typically, we do identify threat landscape.
Hmm.
Then we build protection controls around it.
Hmm.
And then we build detection around that. But
Right.
I think protect and detect, I could not understand. You brought detection first, protection later.
Okay.
Protection is
So the flow here is you need to identify your assets, then you need to be able to detect what could be the threats against them. So what I mean by detect over here is you first identify what can go wrong. How does an attacker look at your threat landscape, and what are they going to pull out of their kitty to attack you? And then you put protective measures, right?
after you put protective measures, let us say firewall tools or NIPS, etc., you need to monitor them. So one more detect will come in your case.
Effectively, in practice, you're generally going to have multiple loops within this flow, right? So you're right. After you put something, the idea is that you need to, I know my threat landscape. Let's take a very simple use case where I have a web application. My web application is exposed to the internet. There's X number of threats that it will face. I'm going to put a web application firewall in front of it. Within the firewall, now that doesn't solve my problem. I need to be able to detect what is happening. I need to know if somebody is trying to do a DDoS, somebody is throwing an SQL injection at me or running SQL map or something, right? So my detection engineering is actually going to help me say that my firewall has this capability of identifying these 5 different things. So I'm going to build use cases when I want to be notified so that I can take additional measures if required. I can scale up the cluster, or I can go behind a CDN. So that loop will keep happening, right, in practice, right? Sure. There's a couple of more questions.
That could be the last question.
Sure. One more slide behind. Here. This one?
Now, when you say what are the pieces of the puzzle, of the external thing, none of them is get captured by SIEM.
None of them will be.
So how does this get?
So you generally need a third-party service which will help monitor the dark web or the broader internet for chatter related to your organization. Now, practically speaking, this is not something that is viable for organizations at all scales, right? It only comes when you're a listed company or you're a unicorn or something like that, right? So that is when, we've actually started seeing that maturity where a lot of more public organizations have started to monitor the dark web. So some of the Indian examples would be that I can think of Paytm, Byju's, Dream11, Nykaa, Zerodha. These are some of the more prominent names that you will see who would benefit a lot because they have a huge bunch of data. It could be user data, it could be their own intellectual property. If they get breached, it shows up on the dark web. Somebody is going to put it on dark web for sale, right, after they've milked it for whatever it's worth. So that is when your external monitoring, what you're looking at over there is you're trying to preempt, right, before it becomes more common knowledge. So that's where a service like that will help you.
So that means these like how we have got external threat intelligence services. This is part of that, and this should be going on in addition to SIEM review.
Ideally,
so
yes.
both of them are essential to be reviewed and for any possible breaches.
Absolutely.
So one last point from my side, actually what you mentioned hit me very hard, that the L1 level person who's monitoring the SIM log actually is a person who's a non-entity because he's supposed to be doing a routine activity.
True.
What you showed about those possible threats which were coming in the scenarios, now that guy has to be sufficiently trained to identify such patterns for him to really come up and raise the alarm. Otherwise, he will get lost into a routine.
The noise, yes.
So, how do organizations take this up, and do you help in doing that exercise?
We do. I'll tell you how organizations are handling this. The most common thing that gets thrown about is AI/ML. I personally don't feel AI/ML is mature enough to provide us that level of input as yet. ML has a certain amount of efficacy, but when you have a large volume of data and you need to sift out anomalies, that is where ML really shines. AI, I don't see a lot of use cases over there. What really works is process, right? When you have business awareness amongst your entire monitoring team, be it a vendor or be it an in-house team, and you have a layer where somebody can chain together different activities and push it up the level to my L2 or an L3 and say, look, I'm seeing this, maybe you want to take a second look at it, right? So typically, an L1 analyst will have 3 decisions to make. A, this is an incident, I need to raise it. B, this is a false positive, I need to close it. C, I don't know what this is, I need to push it up, right? The quicker you can do this, the better your SOC's effectiveness will be, right? So so actually to sum up the answer, better training, better awareness, and more layered approach.
So do you provide help on that services in that area?
We do, yeah, we do. Right. All right, I believe there were a couple of more questions, but since we've run out of time, I've got 10 minutes overdue. I'm happy to take questions. I'll be around for the rest of the day as well. Right? Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, that was Bhowmik Shah, co-founder and CTO from CyberNX, and thank you so much, Bhowmik, for that wonderful presentation. And I'm sure many more questions, but Bhowmik and the whole team is available, and you are more than welcome to reach out to them anytime. I would now like to call on stage Jitendra Jadwani, Head Business Transformation and CISO from Tata Motors Finance Limited, to kindly do the honors to Bhowmik. Jitendra ji, thank you for doing the honors. Really appreciate it.
It was an excellent session.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Jitendra ji, for doing the honors, and Bhowmik, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.